Chair, I've got apologies from Councillor Carr.
Councillor Carr. Why it's so very late and why it's so very urgent?
Thank you, Councillor Epton, and thank you for receiving this report at such a late notice. I'll take the second matters first about the lateness of the report. There was quite a late announcement by government on the detail of the funding. That's the first thing. And secondly, we had liaised and consulted with school leaders about their role in this. And actually, it was only at quite a late time that they came back with a final conclusion that they just didn't feel as a sector they had the capacity to deliver this as an entire programme, although they are delivering their own summer schools. So those are two of the reasons. The second part, which is why the urgency is, it's really important that respecting procurement rules, we do need to not being able to put the cart before the horse, but we do now need to be able to procure through whichever process to get a range of very interested providers involved in the summer activity, which begins in about 6 weeks' time.
If I can just say, Pauline, and I'll just explain to the committee, I thought it would have been quite churlish of me as chair for procedural matters to actually block this going through, and the detriment that would have caused to many young people. So that's why I agreed for it to come this evening, for you to have the papers as quickly as possible and for us to have the opportunity to actually debate it. So thank you, Pauline. We understand. If you can now take us through the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Very much appreciated. So clearly the purpose of this report is to implement the package, and it's mainly around the food, the element of food poverty. So the Department for Education Holiday Activity and Food, the HAF programme, which was also used over Easter, needs to be provided. There has been a multi-agency steering group looking at this, and we really have used the Better Together principles as to how we are actually as close as possible, in addition to the school community, how are we as close as possible to our local communities in providing activity and food, and therefore the connection with Community Action Derby, again on the Better Together principles, is the preferred way forward. So we're actually looking for approval now to allow the council to award the grant of up to 700,000 of the holiday funding to Community Action Derby, who will then be in a position to use a 4-week procurement period to go out to a list of people who are providers who are teed up and very excited about making this provision in Derby. So where the recommendation is that you accept the grant of 1.195 million, and that Community Action Derby will administer and work with delivery partners to provide meals and activities. The reason why there is a difference between the 700,000 and the rest is because some schools and some children's centres are providing some activity. So there is other activity happening. Not put in detail here, but that's why they don't have the full amount. We've added some additional supporting information on items 4.1 to 4.3, and again it stresses that there has been a multi-agency steering group in the design and implementation of the HAF programme. A whole range of providers will benefit from this, including, you know, we hope, not preempting the procurement process, but people like Derby Theatre and other organisations within the city who are best placed to do a whole range of sports and leisure activities for young people, and already have that relationship with communities. And of course, very importantly, that strategic relationship with the Food for Thought Alliance in connection with Community Action Derby and the successful delivery of food for disadvantaged children through the Food for Thought Alliance over Christmas and summer. So we know that we have a model that actually works. So we've looked at the other options, which is looking at 6.1. The council could run the administration of the HAF programme itself, running grant competitions, but we didn't feel that this was a viable option given the timescales available. Community Action Derby are better placed to ensure all of the distribution and procurement of services, and our approach is, as I said earlier, our approaches to schools and working with school leaders resulted in a response from them, which is that they don't have the capacity to deliver this as a total additional programme. So, happy to take questions.
Thank you, Pauline. Now, this before I take contributions, I just would like to say a few words. This is no criticism at all of officers, because this goes part of the way, I think, to resolving an issue that we identified as councillors many months ago. And it's all very well and good, but it only goes so far. This is a little bit, it's been described to me as receiving Maundy money, and it's a bit like turning up at church to get that poor law relief. What we would like to see this council implement is the motion that was passed at this council full meeting, which was to extend free school meals for all children, irrespective of whether they turn up for activities or not. Anyway, I made that point. Any more contributions?
I'll just add, I'm sad that we haven't had longer to consider the implications of this paper. But I think the point you made about the original motion, and I think the other element here is to recognise the children who don't qualify for free school meals, but whose families are still actually in food poverty and other sorts of poverty, and particularly this summer are in need of the catch-up help, which will otherwise set children back for very much longer. So I think it's a pity it's come with such a rush at this point, but I do accept that it's more important to get it moving than to hold it up.
Thank you, Chair. How many young people will be able to benefit from this investment?
I think in the Easter it was around 11,000 children, so I can't quote that precisely, but happy to share that with you at another time. 43,000 children in the school population, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I agree with that this is a bit rushed, and but nevertheless, in many respects, it is a good initiative. On the other hand, I think it is limited, as Councillor Repton said. I think I still believe that parents, given the opportunity, are the best people to feed their own children, and therefore I still think there should be a voucher scheme. But moving on from that, could I ask a question? Because it seems that sort of almost £500,000 of this funding then, if I've understood what you said, and I accept that I may not have done, is not actually accounted for in this report. So please can you give us some indication? I mean, it doesn't have to be incredibly detailed if we're talking about you've allocated it to schools, but can you give us some indication of where that's gone, how they became eligible, and what kind of provision that is going to fund? Thank you.
Yes, so...
Would you like to come back? Thank you.
Apologies. Thank you. So almost all schools are providing summer holiday provision of some kind. Some schools are not eligible, which are some of the special schools with the most complex children with the most complex needs, and so they wanted to combine some of the half activity with their summer school. So although I've said that as a whole programme schools did not want to administer this, some individual schools have wanted and will provide some of those holiday activities and food within the school programme. And I say all but one school that's eligible is running some kind of summer holiday scheme. We've also worked with the children's centres, who obviously have close connection with families in localities, and will know families in need, and will have a detailed knowledge of what those needs are. So that's another element. The other option is that that some of the funding can be rolled forward into other holiday schemes, so it doesn't all have to be spent at the time. But obviously, we're very keen, and I've looked at every opportunity to access every single child that's eligible. But you know, as I say, the steering group is continuously looking at that reach through community groups. So we feel we've got the best intelligence to deliver this as is possible.
Thank you, Chair. In my initial question about how many young people could be engaged with this activity, around about 11,000, was this modelled on that specific number? And is there a contingency if more children come forward that need to access it? What would happen then? And what happens if it went over even, say, that contingency? What's in place then?
Yeah, the steering group has looked at the experience of the Christmas period, especially with the food provision, and Easter. So there's been obviously a lot of a precedent then. We haven't had this sort of extent of summer holiday activity because, again, like everything in COVID, these are unprecedented times. But they have been able to apply some of those models from the previous two main holidays. Were there to be additional children, I think, you know, no family would be turned down, and we do ask for schools to signpost families, even at the last minute, to Community Action Derby. And that's the model that we also used at Christmas when we did special Christmas food packages, and for example, our Send Parent Carers Together forum also know hundreds of families, and we've worked with them on accessing families in need. So we try to use those people who really know the families and perhaps see them on a weekly or a daily basis to get the provision to them.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry for coming back in again. Very quickly then. So thank you. In your response to my question, thanks. So just for clarification, are you saying most schools are offering some form of activity in the summer, you said? Are you saying that most of them are doing it anyway, and are you saying that most of them are doing it anyway and some of them have some additional funding from this fund, or are you suggesting that all of them have been able to have a little slice of this funding? Thank you.
Yeah, no, some of them have wanted to access this funding and have, committed to making that part of their summer holiday programme. Maybe you might think in an ideal world that every school wanted to do that, but that was the discussion we had with school heads, and they felt that a centralised programme, particularly for the food delivery, was something that they preferred to do because not all of their programmes or their capacity in schools would support that.
Are there any more contributions? If not, I'd like to make a recommendation. And I think the recommendation reflects the will of the council that was expressed, I think it was almost unanimously. Certainly, I don't think that anybody voted, I can't remember if anybody voted against it or not. And that is this. And I'll read out the recommendation that I'm suggesting goes to Cabinet tomorrow night. The holiday activity and food programme, whilst welcome, will only reach those children attending activities. Therefore, Executive Scrutiny recommends that Cabinet implements in full the previously agreed Council motion to supply free meals throughout the whole of this year's holidays. Do I have a seconder for that at all? Thank you, Alison. Well, of course it is.
Can you provide some clarity on what you say again? I didn't quite understand what you were saying. Sorry.
Well, I'll read it again. The holiday activity and food programme, that's this report we've just been discussing, whilst welcome, which it is, will only reach those children attending activities Therefore, Executive Scrutiny recommends that Cabinet implements in full the previously agreed Council motion to supply free meals throughout the whole of this year's holidays. That's what we debated at full Council, and that's what full Council agreed. So I've made that recommendation. We've got a seconder. Okay, Miles at the back.
Thanks, Chair. Can I just ask, how are you planning on funding the second part of...
Sorry?
How are you planning on funding the second part of your recommendation?
How will I balance the funding?
How are you planning on funding it, yeah?
That's not my responsibility. That's up to Cabinet to find the funding. They can find funding for other things. That's not the role of this. The role of the Executive Scrutiny is to make recommendations. That's up to Cabinet then to consider, and to consider ways of fulfilling the will of Council. And the will of Council was that motion that the majority of full Council voted for only a matter of months ago. So if there's no more contributions, I'd like to put it to the vote, please. Yeah, okay. Alan.
Thank you, Chair. I don't actually believe that what you're trying to say to full Council mirrors this report. I think it's two separate things, and I don't actually agree with your amendment to Cabinet.
That's entirely up to you, Alan.
Oh, thanks.
And that's
Thank you, Chair.
And that's up to the public to actually judge which way you support it or not. And it's also up to, I think, the rest of the council who voted for this motion with a majority only a matter of months ago, to whether they've got a conscience or not to see that through. So that's the recommendation. We've actually got we've got a seconder. Do you want to put it to the vote, please, Stephen?
Will do, Chair. Can I have a show of hands for all those in favour, please? 1, 2. So I make that 3, Chair, in favour.
Okay.
A show of hands for all those against, please. 1. That's 3 against.
And I will then use...
Let me just...
Okay.
Sorry, Chair. Any to indicate if they're abstaining, please. Yeah. 3 abstentions. Okay, Chair.
So I'll use my casting vote,
Okay.
as I am entitled to do, to actually pass the motion. Thank you. Okay, moving on to the next item on the agenda, and that is the National Bus Strategy Commitment to Derby Enhanced Partnership. Who's going to take us through this, please?
It's me, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, councillors. The government published its national bus strategy, Bus Back Better, in March this year, and there are decisions and expectations placed on local transport authorities and operators. And the first is that we form an enhanced partnership. Now, we're still awaiting the detailed guidance on that, But the aim of that is to create a formal structure for collaboration, and that partnership will set out, and I quote, an ambitious vision for travel by bus. So it's probably important to state that government are seeking to grow patronage through this development. So this is about rebuilding the bus market after COVID. Now, government have asked that local transport authorities confirm their commitment to establishing that enhanced partnership by the 30th of June, and hence this report going forward for a cabinet decision. And that partnership has to be set up and running by March next year. That partnership must then develop something called a Bus Service Improvement Plan. So, new acronym for us all, a BSIP. And that must set out what improvements are to be delivered, and it must be published by the 31st of October this year. We have had some more initial guidance on this since the report that you've got circulated was written. And that BSIP will form the basis on which the Department for Transport will make their funding decisions for 2022-23. And that future funding is likely to be in two elements, by formula based on the BSIP quality and then on specific larger schemes. So you'll have seen the announcements in the press about the 3 billion funding, etc., when the Bus Back Better strategy was announced. So the BSIP is integral to how that money will be allocated. So all current and future discretionary funding will only be available to those authorities who have formed an enhanced partnership and have completed a BSIP, and this applies similarly to operators. And it's also worth noting that the guidance also says that our performance in relation to the National Bus Strategy will be taken into consideration by government when allocating funding for non-bus related transport schemes. So lots of incentive for us to take this forward. The guidance suggests that it is mandatory for us to collaborate, and the measures in the BSIP that support the market post-COVID will have greater weight. This includes operators agreeing between themselves as well as with the council, mindful of the obvious commercial insensitivities. So, lots of incentives for us to make the commitment and to ensure that we hit those deadlines. So the BSIP will need to set out what the current situation is, so barriers to usage and growth, views of passengers, etc. It will then put forward improvement proposals and how they will be delivered, things like frequency, reliability, price, integration of tickets, integration of modes, access, etc. It will set out targets, again, reliability, journey times, patronage, my teeth have gone, customer satisfaction, and things like carbon emissions. And it will also detail some of those longer term aspirations that we might have, like demand responsive transport or innovations in technology. We will also be required to set out a passenger charter. So the BSIP must be supported fully by the enhanced partnership, and all operators relevant will be expected to confirm their support as part of that BSIP process. Now, the Department for Transport have allocated 100,000 to all authorities to support us, recognising that there are some very challenging timescales in this for all of us to try and set up the development of the enhanced partnership and the BSIP. So this report simply asks that we can get on with the work, really. Can we set up the enhanced partnership, develop the improvement plan, and accept the 100,000 from the Department of Transport to get that work underway? And thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Before I take any contributions or questions, just a bit of a question, actually. The National Bus Strategy, if this had been in place perhaps a year ago, would it have saved the 17A Darley Abbey bus service, which is withdrawn, leaving many elderly, disabled people high and dry and trapped in the village? Could it have helped them? And people in Broadway and Alistair as well. Yeah. Thank you.
I think the important thing to say about the enhanced partnership and the BSIP is that this is based on consensus. So this certainly, from my perspective, gives us a more formal seat at the table. So as you are very well aware, you know, at the moment, we don't have powers to mandate particular actions regarding commercial services as they are offered by local bus operatives. So this would certainly give us a greater seat at the table. And within the guidance, there is certainly the spirit of the guidance is that not all services will be planned on a purely commercial basis. But the important things to say is when we make the proposals in the improvement plan, they are to base on evidence and data. So we have to say that we can grow patronage and that it has to be consensus. So we engage, but we cannot dictate. So again, it's the strength of partnerships, the strength of relationships, as so many things are.
I say this half tongue-in-cheek. Is that a yes or a no?
Who can say? I would hope so, because we're having that conversation.
It just reminds me. I was watching Yes Minister the other day, and it still makes me chuckle. Still relevant to today. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Werner, for the report. Sorry I didn't listen to all of it. I was a bit late. But I think I welcome the idea of partnership working and the idea that we can try to influence bus operators and other stakeholders to have a joined up approach here. We know that in the last few years, 2, 3 years, 4 years, bus companies have had a commercial imperative, and they have stopped bus routes which have not been commercially viable, which has had a negative impact on many communities who are already isolated. I represent one of them in Normanton Ward. I'm sure there are other members here who know and have areas like that in their areas, and we've not been able to do anything about it. Despite representations, petitions, they've listened politely, but then they've done what they wanted to do. So I do welcome the idea of partnership working and stakeholders coming together, and I do feel, though, that persuasion can only go so far. I'm not sure how much of this paper and the background information says about what powers we have to give more than persuasion, and we know that's about investment. We know that in the COVID-19 world, investment to maintain the bus service and other public transport systems was found, was made available, and it's an example that we need to see how do we sort of push that. Now, I'm not sure whether this paper identifies any funding incentives that we have made available to us from government. If they have, great, we should use that as a lever. If they haven't, Chair, I think we should be recommending that we sort of strongly campaign to get funding allocated for serving those routes which are not commercially viable for bus companies, and we know historically they have not used those, and they've shut those or cut them down at the detriment of our vulnerable and isolated communities. So I would suggest a response to see whether there is any funding allocated, which I suspect there's not. But if there isn't, we should be sort of making a strong recommendation about funding needs to follow partnership working, and persuasion needs a bit more impetus, I say.
Thank you. Is that a recommendation to Werner to take back, or is that a recommendation you'd like us to make on behalf of the executive scrutiny?
I mean, depending on the response, which I'm sure she's going to tell me that, yes, we've got money. If we haven't got money, I would recommend that we make a recommendation.
Think about penning something then. Werner, thank you.
The devil is in the detail. So at the moment, we are still awaiting the guidance on what the rules for the enhanced partnership, and we're awaiting further guidance on what that BSIP will do and what it needs to do. But what they've made very, very clear is current and future discretionary funding, including the 3 billion that was announced as part of the strategy, will be dependent on that BSIP. So whatever improvements we put forward and the quality of that, that's how we will be judged, and that's how they will allocate the funding for next year. So really you know, getting that right, getting the evidence right, getting that agreement between us, that's the financial imperative, and that goes for funding to us as the council and funding that goes to operators as well. So the government have put those carrots, for want of a better word, in there, carrots and sticks in there. So yes. So and obviously the plan will come back for decision making as well. So I suspect you will have a greater chance to scrutinise at that point.
Hodil?
Subject to that, I think I understand that planning is the first step. If we do the right things, the government will if we cooperate with them, they'll cooperate with us. But I think we should put a marker down here that we should be looking, if we do our bit, which is what Werner's report indicates, that we need to coordinate and persuade and have a partnership, coordinated approach for transport, for buses and others, we should be putting a recommendation now to say that we can't do this without investment, and that we should be campaigning for that in the future plans.
I guess those points will be made tomorrow night. Okay. Thank you very much. Councillor Pegg and then Councillor Kerr. Councillor Pegg.
Thank you, Chair. Will the strategy potentially look at new bus routes and also extending the use of electric buses?
Yes, absolutely, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I would see this as we would consider everything in the round. Again, the imperatives are about rebuilding the bus companies after the year that they've had. But yes, as long as we've got the evidence and the data, and once we've got those agreed targets, of just say journey times, reliability, patronage growth, customer satisfaction, you know, we'll be doing a passenger charter, etc. And absolutely, yeah, decarbonisation, the reduction in CO2 emissions is clearly part of the targets that we'll have to be setting and ambitions that we should have. Absolutely.
Thank you. And I had a look through some of the main document that the government's put out on this, as well as the report here, and it sounds very big and ambitious, and to actually deliver it is going to need quite a lot of courageous decision making. And it's quite interesting because it's come out of a Conservative government, and it's going to be quite a change of direction from what Conservatives have previously delivered in Derby, and it will be interesting to see how that pans out. But it is vital for climate change and for bus service recovery and to manage congestion. It's a pity it's being dictated from London. I think it's something that we were ahead of at one point in Derby, but we clearly aren't now. I think it'll mean we'll be bringing some bus lanes back, some of the ones that we have had before, and hopefully some other ones as well. And the consultation is going to be absolutely vital for this. The report talks about the tightness of the time frame for doing this, and the importance of consultation, which is really contradictory, because we're about to run into the summer holidays when we tend to stop doing consultation. We're saying we can't really do anything because we haven't got the guidance yet, but we're not going to hit those timetables, and we're not going to have done the consultation, and we're not going to have got absolutely vitally, the ideas from both existing and future bus users and potential passengers, as well as the companies. And there's nothing here in the recommendations that says we need to start now. The recommendations are to submit a commitment to approve the development and to accept the money, which is fine. So I've got a recommendation that I'd like to put forward, Chair, to say that we should start working now to engage with bus companies and passengers and major employers to start raising awareness of desires and needs. And the consultation, because consultation takes time to get up to speed, and we don't have long.
Have you written that down?
I have written it down, it's on my piece of paper here. But we're not allowed to touch bits of paper, it's really dangerous.
Chair, Councillor Kerr, if you read it out again if it's required to before we go to the vote, but if you could pop that into an email for me as well, I'll capture it here so we're covering all bases.
I'll read it out again and I'll email it to you, hopefully between bits of the meeting. My theatrical voice. So my recommendation is to start working to engage with bus companies and passengers and major employers now to start raising awareness of the desires and needs. Because consultation takes time to get up to speed and we don't have long.
Okay, do I second for that? Councillor Lindsay? Okay. Right, Stevens. Any more contributions or shall we just go to the vote? Okay, let's vote, please.
Thanks, Chair. Could I have a show of hands of all those in favour, please?
That's all right. Unanimous.
10.
Thank you, Chair. Really like what I'm hearing in the report, especially like the phrase bus back better. But on the, I think it's 4.3, which says that we're awaiting the detailed guidance, but we expect the plan to consider things like reliability, journey times, and where bus priority is needed. Can I just ask, are those sort of three factors going to be equally weighted, or will sort of one of them take priority over the other? And where we're looking at where bus priority is needed, what factors we think may go into that? Because obviously, if you look, a few months ago, bus priority was a lot lower with the lower usage of buses, but in a few months, we're getting through now the bounce back. We're getting, more people are going back to work, more people are using buses again. How long a time frame do we think we'll be looking back to look at the priority?
The guidance certainly suggests that what we've been told gives the most weighting is those improvement measures that support getting the market back on its feet. So I think anything that is about growing patronage will probably be the highest weighting from a Department for Transport point of view. And obviously you raise a very good question about, how do we use that data, because, we've had a very disruptive year. So I think we're going to have to come to a view with that collectively with the bus operators, but they clearly have good passenger information, and as you've all said, the views of local people and passengers themselves need to be taken into consideration as part of this report. So I would see, I'm guessing, estimating, I don't know, perhaps 3 years, 2 years, something like that, so that we get that right. But you're absolutely right. I think one of the things to perhaps say is that the requirement is that this is an organic process, so there are stipulations to go back and review this improvement plan. So we'll be doing that at least on an annual basis, I would suspect, and probably more over the next couple of years, and before we go out to stretch it out to a longer time. So I think it's always going to be a work in progress. We do have some good relationships in the city already. We do have a strategic bus partnership already established. So we've got some good foundations. So hopefully we can move things forward. But yeah, I think it's a little bit of wait and see.
Thank you very much for that. No one else indicating wish to speak, so we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. Thank you very much, Vernon. Thank you. Is tennis strategy, who have we got here this evening?
Thank you, Chair. I can take that. It's Ian Fulliger.
Hello.
Hi. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. So the tenancy strategy is a statutory strategy. It sets out the council's and Derby Home's position in relation to the rent levels that we and Derby Homes will charge, and also the type of tenancy that both organisations will offer, i.e. whether there be fixed-term tenancies or whether there be permanent tenancies. The strategy then also provides guidance for housing associations that have got stock within the city, and they are required by government to have regard to what we're saying within our strategy, but they're not ultimately required to adhere to it. And we do need to be mindful, Chair, that as housing associations merge into larger and larger groups, it becomes more difficult for them, understandably, to reflect the views of a number of local authorities that they will operate across. In terms of our tenancy strategy, there's no significant change. So generally, the tenancy strategy says that we recommend that permanent or secure tenancies are offered within the city, and that generally target rent, or as we would know it, council rents, the old social rents, are provided rather than affordable rents. The two exceptions to that are in relation to the type of tenancy, is that we do now make allowance for fixed-term tenancies in one very limited instance, and that is where the government are providing grant funding in relation to accommodation for homeless and rough sleeping people, and where it's a particular requirement of the government that that accommodation should be provided on a fixed term basis. And there's practical reasons why that works well. If they weren't of a fixed term nature, that there is the very real likelihood that that accommodation would quickly be silted up without people moving on, and it would quickly be ineffective. The other exception relates to the rent levels that are to be set, and we recognise that generally, as I said, affordable rent should be charged, target rent should be charged, except for where a new development is taking place, and that new development, because of viability reasons, needs to be charged at the slightly higher affordable rent rate. Now in Derby there isn't a great deal of difference between target rent, council rent, and affordable rent. Those differences are much, much more pronounced within the South East, where the affordable rent, which is based on market prices, are much higher. But nevertheless, we say where viability requires the slightly higher affordable rent to be charged, then we acknowledge that, and we wouldn't want to stifle new development by insisting that the cheaper social rent be charged. And that's it. Thank you, Chair.
The report refers to, Chair, the rough sleepers and homeless funding and grant that the council has been able to access. I'm familiar with this in my previous role as the Police and Crime Commissioner, and looking at this from the point of view of homelessness, genuine homelessness, not homelessness where people pretend and then do begging and things, but there are many. And we've had a very good partnership across the police, city council, city mission, Derby Homes, really important part, and other partners, voluntary sector as well. And we've made some really positive inroads in terms of tackling homelessness. And I think it's fair to say we've had more funding allocated in Derby than any other part of the country. And it's an example. And this, I welcome the idea of a flexible, fixed-term facility for homeless people, because one of the keystones of rehabilitation and making people permanently settled rather than homeless is them being able to move in transition from different phases of support. And that allows flexibility to move from one type of property to another. And if this allows that, then that's all good. But I would want to make sure that that doesn't mean they lose their fixed, their permanency of their allocation for home, for accommodation with the council. So as long as there's assurance from either the report or the officers that that is the case, then I'd welcome and support this initiative, because it builds on what we've been doing in partnership in the city. So I would ask for confirmation or not of this, and that's really important, because being fixed-term, temporary accommodation is fine, as long as long-term they are still on our books and will finally get accommodation, which is the right level and the right point at the end of their rehabilitation.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Absolutely, Chair. The the whole purpose, as was said, of this accommodation is to provide supported accommodation. So the government have grant funded us to provide the bricks and mortar, the actual accommodation, but side by side they've also given us revenue funding as well to provide the support packages to enable those disadvantaged people to receive this support they need. And then crucially, obviously, they will be moved on to appropriate accommodation depending upon their individual circumstances. But absolutely, they will be assessed at the end of the fixed term as to what accommodation best meets their needs going forward.
I'm not used to this laptop business, have I? I think this is definitely going in the right direction, and I welcome the tenor of the report. But I'm a bit concerned about the comment under 9.1, which is climate implications, which effectively says that this has no implications for impact on the climate. And as it's written, it doesn't, because it hasn't been written with climate in mind. But whenever we have a report going to the council, there is an opportunity for us to think climate. And if you then start to think climate, you realise that you can do things with a tenancy policy strategy which can make a difference to what we can do in terms of our climate footprint. So I've just got two examples here. One is in terms of the flexibility of our moving people on, that where we have a house, a four-bedroomed house that may only be now occupied by a couple whose family have all left home. Here we're saying we don't want to put that into the flexible system, but if we did, it would immediately mean that that couple would have a smaller home to heat, that they would have a smaller carbon footprint, and that would be a benefit as well as the benefit for a family being able to move into it. I don't think we've got that in place yet, because I don't think we have our strategy written. We need to have a plan for how to deliver our climate emergency. But once we do, we should come back, and that should be another reason for looking at the way we review that policy and make it work in the future. Another example is where we have a really efficient property, and we know that because it's a really energy efficiency property, the fuel bills for the family living there, the individuals or family living there, will be lower. And therefore there is the opportunity for some of their housing costs to actually be recycled back into Derby Homes or into other providers, so that other buildings can be made more energy efficient, or that we can be building more properties that we need. And therefore the second thing we could be doing is looking at the acceptability of affordable rents for homes which are very energy efficient. And I think that second one, we should be writing a paragraph into the strategy that is going to Cabinet tomorrow to include that. And the first one we need to bear in mind as soon as we have a climate emergency plan written. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. I think that's for members if they would like to support that, Chair. I think in relation to the first comment, I would just say that's obviously a bigger issue than is trying to be tackled in the tenancy strategy. Whether we, as a council, wanted to downsize households because of the climate change benefits of doing so, that's a bigger decision than's trying to be tackled in this particular report, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to turn to priority 4, housing development and regeneration, and just if you could expand on plans for growing the housing stock, specifically in relation to demand, because there's always more demand than houses. So could you expand on the strategy for that, please?
Thank you, Chair. So I suppose our strategy is two-pronged in terms of growing the affordable housing stock. The first prong is what we can do ourselves in terms of the councils and Derby Homes' own development. And we've recently adopted a housing revenue account business plan which significantly increases the amount of investment that is going into providing new affordable homes that would become council homes in due course. We're working very hard with Derby Homes. The council a couple of months ago approved the transfer of around about 8 or 10 sites that were held in the council's general fund into the housing revenue account, and those sites will be able to be built on by the council to increase our affordable housing stock. The second part of the strategy is working with housing associations, and clearly the council and Derby Homes can't do it all, and we're very energetic in liaising with housing associations and encouraging them to build more affordable housing in the city, because all of their homes, of course, are available to people on the council's housing waiting list, the home finder system. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think climate concerns are a serious issue for all of us. And I often greatly respect Councillor Kerr's proposals, and I admire her long-term insistence in this council, often previously sniggered at, about the need for cycle provision. However, on this one, I was to say that without, I mean, it is just what she's just said, so we haven't got any details threshed out. But my implication is to strongly disagree with this. I think that there is an issue about larger homes and the shortage of those in the city, and the desirability of people to move out of those as they get older. But we must remember that just as in nice private 4 or 5 bedroom 1930s housing in Aller Street and Littleover and such places, people develop a strong attachment to where they live as their home. This is the same for council tenants, and we shouldn't make assumptions about what their energy use is when people are living in houses. You know, people's energy use varies. So just as I always oppose the bedroom tax quite strongly, I don't think moving people around because we're making assumptions about their energy consumption levels is at all suitable. And likewise, I don't think we should be penalising people because the home that they have been given, because there isn't a lot of choice in the social housing sector, or allocated to, is actually fortunately provided with the kind of insulation, etc., that we should all be seeing as a norm now. So I'm afraid on this one, I do have to disagree with Councillor Kerr, that I don't like her proposals. And actually, where we should all be moving towards very rapidly is looking at how we can we can furnish new social housing and many, many houses in the city with heat pumps. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Patterson, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I was just wondering on 4.3, where it references the 20 flats that have been acquired by the council across the city. Has that used up all of the available funding, or is there still scope to add to purchase any more flats for people in the near future? And also, have those 20 flats that have been acquired, are they all now occupied by people?
Ian?
Thank you, Chair. You'll forgive me. I'm not that close to it. Certainly the money has all been used, and the 21 properties are provided. I believe, Chair, that they are all occupied. The good news is we've then bid for some successor funding to this, and we have received the news that that has been successful as well. So there is another batch of properties to provide the same supported accommodation coming through, Chair. Thank you.
If there's no more contributions, we'll move on to the next item. Thank you very much, Ian. Sorry, Councillor Kerr.
I mentioned I had a couple of recommendations,
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
which Councillor
I didn't hear you
Martin
correctly. Sorry.
Councillor
Sorry, Lisa.
Martin also referred to. In the first one regarding reconsideration of the flexible tenancies, I was merely saying that we should review it, not what my recommendations would be on that subject. And on the second one, it would actually help provide additional funding for the things like air-sourced heat pumps, which she was referring to. But I've suggested a couple of wording to Mr. Mason, if has he come through? Yeah.
Can you take us through those, Stephen? This is a recommendation from Councillor Kerr. Stephen will read it out to us, and then we can have a debate, or Lucy can explain first of all, then we'll have a debate and then go to the vote.
So number 1, Chair, to review the use of flexible fixed-term tenancies for property types in short supply within 12 months of agreeing a climate emergency action plan.
Okay. Does somebody want to Yeah. Can you read this again, please? If you could speak up, please, Stephen.
To review the use of flexible fixed-term tenancies for property types in short supply within 12 months of agreeing a climate emergency action plan.
Okay. Anybody wants to have a question, or Miles?
I don't really see how they link together.
Can you explain, Lucy, please?
The officer was suggesting that we should be keeping these flexible tenancies under review. And one of the reasons for doing that is to make better use of our housing stock. If housing stock is being poorly utilised, we're probably also making poor use of our housing stock in terms of energy efficiency. And therefore, to look in the round at our housing stock utilisation at a time when we have a climate emergency plan would be timely. So it's not a really close link, but if everybody is using their housing as efficiently as possible, then our total carbon footprint should be lower as a city.
I'm getting some puzzled looks on faces. Councillor Eyre.
Yeah, can I just ask Councillor Kerr to define property types, please? Focus on the word types.
I think the officers were talking about things like the number of bedrooms, or if they've got particular adaptations in them. Single bed accommodation, I think, is in short supply. If you've got an adapted building, so people with disabilities, that could be, they're in short supply as well. And of course, if we have adapted buildings which are either being unadapted or are not being, their adaptations not being used, we are likely to be then having to do other adaptations for a practical energy and financial cost, because we aren't utilising the adaptations that have already taken place.
Do you have a seconder for the motion at all? We don't seem to do it. I think people are. I think I'm trying to be helpful here, Lisa. I don't think people are necessarily against what you're saying. I think they're maybe struggling with the concept a little bit, but maybe outside of here, if Ian can take back some of your concerns and see if we can look at that and tweak that, and maybe you can talk to Ian, and maybe there might be something you want to bring to us again. Okay. Oh, okay with that. Okay. Well, thank you very much for that, Ian. Sorry, Lucy. Yeah.
There's a second. There were two. That's the first one.
Oh, sorry. That's the first one. Sorry. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. The second proposal then is to add a paragraph on greater acceptability of affordable rents for homes which are very energy efficient.
Okay. Lucy, do you want to help us with this?
Well, at the moment, Chair, as the report explains, the same dwelling might have a different rental value depending on what style of rent it's classified as. So if that building is a council house, it'll have a lower rate, a lower rent than if it's a housing association building, and it could even be higher. So it depends on how it's being classified and who owns it. But if somebody is making a little bit more money from the rent, then they can invest that money in improving buildings. So the ones that we should be looking at for greater investment potential are those which are already very cheap to run. We're building houses now which should be zero carbon, that have got solar panels on the roof, that have got air source heat pumps, and some of them are now will be coming in without even any gas heating. So there will be potentially no energy bills at all, and you can live and do everything you want in that home for free.
Okay.
We're not quite there yet, but we will be getting there. And there are other properties which still need their gas heating. They still got expensive electricity bills and so on. If you happen to have one of those really cheap buildings, you are probably you'll be still getting the same amount of housing benefit if you're on housing benefit, because you're still paying the same rent, but you won't be having to pay the same fuel costs.
Okay.
So you're winning. Now, it would be lovely if more people in the city were able to win in that way, and we won't get there unless we invest in all the homes that aren't yet efficient enough. So this provides a little bit more money to enable both Derby Homes and the council to investing in housing stock and potentially housing associations, so that we can have all our buildings as energy efficient as possible. And this would be a way to do it, to get a little bit more income without penalising people who are benefiting at the moment from a really energy efficient property.
Can I ask you for your professional advice about how we could proceed down this road, the road that Lucy suggests, or are there many barriers to that? And then I'll take Councillor
Can I come in before?
Yes, sorry, hold on. I'll take you first, and then Ian can come back. You can have time to think about that one. Okay.
Just to say, I think the idea of trying to make all our homes as energy efficient as possible is something that we all would support.
Absolutely.
There's no doubt about that. The question, if I can add a question to Ian's response, is surely isn't that part of our strategy anyway in the council, to make sure that our own stock, but as far as the wider stock, is already, we push for energy efficiency and reducing the carbon footprint. And isn't that already in the wider strategy? How we look at our stock and how we work as a council?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Certainly in terms of all the new houses that we're building, we are trying to build to very high eco standards now, trying to make them as close to carbon zero as possible. I suppose in relation to a comment in relation to the use of affordable rents, we've probably done it the other way round in the strategy by saying to housing associations, if the viability of your scheme requires a slightly higher affordable rent, then we recognise you can charge it. And so I would hope that they will all be pushing towards achieving very high eco standards, and therefore, if they need the extra money, they would use the clause in here to say, yes, we're going to charge the higher affordable rent. Councillor Kerr's point is slightly more overt, making the point a bit more overtly, isn't it?
To make it more,
a bit more overtly, Chair.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Right. Is there a seconder for that motion? There isn't, sadly, but I think Lucy does make some important points, and I can see you nodding vigorously. I think as a committee we'd like you to take them back and maybe engage in some dialogue with Lucy about that. And then Lucy, if you can feed back to us whether you're still unhappy, you don't think we've gone far enough. That's probably the best we can do this evening, Lucy.
I think, Chair, that I'm probably just a little ahead of the curve, and it'll come back in
You always are, Lucy. You always are. And that was a compliment. That was a compliment, by the way. Right, thank you very much for that. Thank you, Ian. Okay, right. Item 10, I think we've got the finance guru, Simon Riley. If you could address the compliance with contract and financial procedure rules, item 10, then we have to go into closed session after that. Simon, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And just to make new members aware, this is a standard report on most cabinet agendas to notify you of things that we are required to under our financial procedure rules and our contract procedure rules. So today there are 3 items that I wish you to consider. There's a 2 in the main report, and then there's an addendum that I would ask you to also look at. But if I go to the 2 items in the main report, the first item is in respect of entering into a capital grant agreement of up to 17.25 million with Smartbox Bondon Limited. Members will be aware of the exciting development planned in the on the old Celanese site of bringing in high-tech food manufacturing, the potential of up to 4,500 jobs, and the fact that early on in the year we notified you of our success in getting building fund from a LEP of £12 million and a contribution from the council of 5.25 million. The reason for this report is back in March, this was going to be awarded to Smart Park Limited. Since then, Smart Park Limited, which is primarily owned by the Tonro Group, are able to partner with a significant institutional investor, which we can detail in the private part of the agenda. But that means that we are now, or a special purpose vehicle is being set up in relation to this development. Apart from that, there's no change in all the obligations linked to the grant and everything else, and indeed we are confident that this special purpose vehicle will allow the site to be developed in line with the build out, which is already ambitious, by the combination of the Tonro Group, who we know as Smart Park, and their institutional investor. So really it's just a dotting the I's and crossing the T's about who we are going to be paying the grant to. The second part of the original report is in respect of the Ascend programme. The Ascend programme is to help high growth businesses expand, create jobs in the city, and it's a mixture of capital and revenue budget. Through the Ascend programme, we receive proposals, business cases, requests from these high growth businesses who are subject to quite a rigorous due diligence and Dragon's Den experience in respect to this. And there is one food and beverage provider in the city who is looking to expand into the provision of coffee capsules. So effectively developing a new market. In order to do that, they need or would like support in marketing, in the social media, help and everything else, and the Ascend programme are able to match these businesses with experts in that field. So this is a loan in line with the council's standard loan approach to this company of £25,000 from a £2 million Ascend revenue budget, and it will of course be subject to the due diligence that would go with any loan that we pay over to a third party. And the third item on item 10 is what is called the addendum report. This is in respect of bid for an acceptance of funding for Section 31 revenue grants of between £250,000 and £400,000 from Public Health England, and award this grant to Derby City Mission. This is in respect of rough sleeping, drug and alcohol treatment, and most members in the city will recognise the real key part of Derby City Mission as part of Team Derby in helping to reduce rough sleeping and address some of its links to substance misuse, which we all know is a major causal effect of some people's homelessness, as well as sometimes difficulty in accessing services to assist. We demonstrated really good help to this cohort during the COVID pandemic, and the key milestones of this funding is to develop a new trauma-informed care navigator engagement wraparound service, so building on what we have already, sort of a recruitment of project staff and navigators to help people in this situation to navigate through, which is often a complex sort of a series of interventions to help them, to create sort of a multi-agency approach. And you'll be aware, for example, of our good work with the paramedic ambulance service in respect to this. And when we have a look at it, obviously this is best placed in the sort of a safe space multi-agency rough sleeper hub and the Safe Space grant holders, Derby City Mission, and I've heard them in another forum, and I think the work they're doing is absolutely amazing in the city. So this is asking you for the permission to pay over this grant if we are successful to Derby City Mission for what I've described. So the 3 items, Chair, on here, and then there is information about the institutional partner, which will be considered under item 12 in private session because of its confidentiality. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. Any comments, questions? Lucy?
Yeah, I really hope we get the grant to help support the rough sleepers and City Mission. We've done some really good work in that direction, and at the moment it does need that ongoing funding, and we need that really good. I'd just like to ask 2 things. One is about the Ascend loan advance, which isn't commented on in terms of the climate change implications in the report. And I'd just like a bit more description as to whether we actually think that their product is going to be assisting us in that direction in terms of waste reduction and energy reduction, or whether we have actually reviewed it in those terms as part of our due diligence, or if not, to make sure that we do. And secondly, it's a question that is partially answered by the confidential item relating to Smart Park, but I just think it's important to understand whether our risks in this venture, our £5 million, is whether it's more or less risky, as it were, now than it was when it went to Cabinet earlier in the year. If the ownership of Smart Park Spondon Limited, this new entity, is not Smart Park, but it is this other investment partner, it feels a sort of sleight of hand. We've got an organisation that is a separate organisation, but it is not the one which we've previously been working with, owned by somebody different. And again, there is the due diligence about that. What do we know about this new entity which has appeared, this Tonro Group? So just a bit more, please, on the risks we're talking about here.
Thank you, Lucy. Simon?
So just to give clarity, the Tonro Group are the people who originally approached us a year ago, known and have this subsidiary called Smart Park. They're a £300 million plus body who are involved very much in building and managing services to major warehousing, food production and other services across the country. For businesses of this size, we do advanced and specialist due diligence when we appointed, when we submitted the bid for Smart Park with Tonro Group as the developer. In the private session, I'll be able to say that the due diligence and financial position of the institutional investor is literally sort of A+. And when we share the name of it, I think you'll agree that they have a significant presence in this sector. So what will happen is that the institutional investor will effectively acquire the Celanese site from the American owners, our ransom strip around it, and also access from the site from another landholder. What will then happen is that the Tonro Group will build out and then provide services for the development of these innovative and large employers who will come onto the Spondon site. So we have carried out due diligence on the new partner, and my view is actually it's strengthened the, not that it wasn't strong already, but it's created very strong alignment and a strategic alignment for it. In terms of your observation on the Ascend programme, I think when we have a look, and I briefly mentioned, I can't mention the business, but of the area that the Ascend programme is trying to develop, of this lifestyle brand providing coffee capsules and whatever to there is a national issue about the compostability or reusability of that particular lifestyle choice, if I can call it, of people buying these capsules to put in their machines and everything else. We can take that back into there to encourage sustainability as part of it. I know who the body is, and I know that sustainability is a very key part of their business ethos. But I don't think we can say that it would be totally sustainable, but we can take that back.
Thank you, Simon. Okay, if there are no more questions or observations, I'd like to thank Simon for that. We now move to item 11, which is exclusion of the press and public. Stephen, can you take us through this? And we've got the confidential paper.
Will do, Chair, thank you. For you to consider a resolution, members, that under Section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public be excluded from the meeting during discussion of the following item on the grounds that it involves a likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Act, and that the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. Thank you.
Okay, the mass exodus, and we now cut off the live stream.
I'll do that now, Chair. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Tell me when we're actually